So we know that 2 wound Space Marines and 3 wound Terminators are on their way. Today we'll talk a little bit more about this change, and which units I think could particularly make good use of this change. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Firstborn Space Marines are known to be closing the gap significantly on their Primaris counterparts when their new codex comes out, and it could really shake up the units that Space Marine players choose to field. I think that the change might help some units a bit more than others, so in this video we're going to talk about what we know so far, and which units I think are going to profit from the change the most, both from the core codex, the Space Marine supplements and Grey Knights, and also the heretical followers of Chaos. Let's jump straight into it. So in their announcement on the Warhammer community side, we know that all the firstborn Space Marines, such as Tactical Marines, Devastators, and everything that came before Primaris, will be going to at least 2 wounds, unless they're Space Marine Scouts. They specifically called out that this would include Grey Knights and Chaos Space Marines, and we've seen a whole bunch of leaked new datasheets that are coming out in packaging that pretty much corroborate this for the new codex. Scouts are going to be remaining at 1 wound, it would seem, which I think might be a good thing for them, as it will really increase their niche within the codex. When everyone else is paying for 2 wounds, it will make them a bit more a standalone choice if you want a cheap troops choice that just wants to sit on an objective and not really do anything else while taking up fewer points. Weirdly enough, this buff to wounds might actually see more scouts on the table. We know the points cost for Tactical Marines, they're going to be 18 points, which seems like a very good deal to me when they were going from 15 before. I do think that point for point 15 points for a Tactical Marine was a little bit steep, and I think that they were a fair bit behind the other troops choices, but gaining a whole extra wound on their stat line for just 3 points extra seems like an amazing deal to me, and I think they will compete decently with Intercessors again. It would appear that Intercessors are only going to be separated by Tactical Marines by +1 attack on their profile and the actual war gear that they carry around. It's interesting because the attack only really matters in close combat, and the war gear only matters if it's actually better, where Primaris Marines do generally tend to have better war gear on each guy, but they don't have any significant options for special or heavy weapons within the squad, which is certainly going to give the firstborn Marines a niche, and perhaps even lead them to being the first choice competitively. We also know that Terminators are going to be going to 3 wounds a model, which I think is quite a cool change. It really does help reflect how tough they are to shift in the lore, and it's going to make them a little bit less susceptible to just being mowed down by flat damage 2 weapons such as overcharged plasma fire. The big question for me at this point is whether or not bike squads are going to be affected by this. They're currently 2 wounds and toughness 5. It will be a big deal as to whether or not they get the extra wound as per the rest of the other firstborn Marines and go to 3 wounds. If I'd had to guess, I'd say they probably will, particularly as those Primaris Outriders have a massive 4 wounds each, and I think it will put some bike squads back on the table again if they did. While a lot of other people might see it as a flat buff, I'm not really sure it is, to be honest. As points costs are going to be changing with this, I think it's going to be more of a shift for the Marine army, from being more of a hard-hitting army to more of a durable army. Basically, if you're paying 3 extra points for only durability upgrades, then it means that your point-for-point damage output will go down. I think that this will be particularly true if you say look at Tactical Marines, who before tended to be a bit less durable than Intercessors on the whole, but fairly equivalent in their point-for-point damage output because you just get more bodies and more shots. Now they're pretty much going to be more durable than Intercessors because they'll cost less, but have a weaker damage output than them. I think that this is going to be particularly relevant on any extremely hard-hitting Marine units that already have the damage output sorted, and making them a bit more well-rounded would generally be a good thing. Or extremely durable Marine units, where just making them even more durable is something that you can really use, say if you want to secure objectives or bully your way up the middle of the board. So let's talk about a few of the units that I think are going to be the biggest beneficiaries of this then. From Codex Space Marines, I think the Devastators are going to be particularly interesting. We do already see them fielded competitively, things like the dreaded Grav Devastator drop pod. If they do increase just the same amount as standard Marines, that would only be 15 points per squad, and would make them so much harder to shift once they get on the board. They'd probably still die to focused fire, but if your opponent has to expend a lot more resources getting rid of them, then that's generally going to be a good thing for the unit. Vanguard Veterans are again very hard hitting and not all that durable. Again, that could be flipped on their head by having an extra wound, particularly if they're carrying storm shields around. Blade Guard Veterans are already a bit of a nightmare to remove with their Storm Shield rules. I can imagine that would certainly hold true for a whole bunch of Vanguard Marines with 2 wounds and 4+ impulse saves, and of course they're a fair bit faster with jump packs. I also think that Terminators are looking very interesting indeed now. They're not just going to fold to mass damage 2 firepower now, and I think that both the tactical version and the assault version could see play. I think it'd be a real pain to remove bigger squads of Terminators with 3 wounds and Thunderhammers and Storm Shields. You wouldn't want to go toe-to-toe to them to try and wrest objectives from them. For the Blood Angels, I think possibly one of the biggest winners out of the whole change are likely to be Death Company. At the moment they're pretty much the ultimate glass hammer unit, incredibly hard hitting to the extent where a tooled up squad could delete almost anything in the game, but very expensive in terms of points per wound, and their 6+ feel no pain type save doesn't really help with that all that much. Similarly with the Graph Devastators, once they've dropped in and murdered whatever they want to, it'll be just harder to remove them, and your opponent won't be able to kill as many other things due to that. And the change will also have pretty great synergy with that feel no pain type save. Just having a 6+ feel no pain really makes things like 2 wound models such as Intercessors vastly more resilient against things like damage 2 weapons. Depending on their eventual points cost, they could well be the biggest winners on this entire list. It'd be interesting to see whether Sanguinary Guard get 3 wounds such as Terminators will. I'll be honest, I'm not all that hopeful for them. They aren't exactly Terminators, and they do look more like veterans, so they might well just stay at 2. For the Dark Angels, we of course have the Deathwing and Ravenwing. 3 wound Terminators are going to be very intimidating as we've already said, and 3 wound Ravenwing Bikes and Black Knights could be very nice as well. Probably best for the Black Knights to be honest, they're decently hard hitting with all that plasma fire, but do have the potential to fold with some concentrated fire. I'd say they might benefit just a little bit less than the average unit here, if indeed bike squads do wind up going to 3 wounds, just because that overcharged plasma will be removing more wounds of bike every time you do roll a dreaded 1, even with the rerolls, and it might disincentivize you to actually go overcharging the plasma if you're going to be removing an even more expensive model if you die. Finally for Space Wolves, I think we'll certainly see a return to more Grey Hunters on the board. I do think that they could be taken more than Intercessors in Space Wolf lists, particularly as they can all take chainswords as well as bolters, meaning that they'll have the same amount of attacks as Intercessors and also be AP-1 and also pack some special weapons. Wolfguard Terminators are some of the best Terminators in the game in my opinion. Some of the most flexible Terminators around, being able to take strange combos such as Storm Shields and Storm Bolters should they want to. And also the Space Wolves Chapter Tactic synergizes amazingly with a -1 to hit of Power Fist and Thunderhammers. Finally, Longfangs, much like Space Marine Devastators, will very much like the durability boost. When they're sitting 48 inches away throwing some las cannon shots downrange, they'll now need a bit more dedicated firepower to remove them, rather than just some stray assault cannon shots or something. Grey Knights are going to get a sizable boost from this, as the battle line of their army does tend to revolve around infantry units of some type. Since Ritual of the Damned, we've got some very scary options for things like Grey Knight Paladins, and it's going to be interesting with their troops Terminators going to 3 wounds, essentially being sort of semi-paladins, just at -1 attack, but getting the all-important objective secured special rule. If you activate some of the powerful defensive combos on these guys, you're going to have a unit that can very easily go forward and steal objectives from under the opponent's nose. Of course, everything else such as strike squads, interceptors, and purgation squads will be a fair bit more tanky. I imagine with 2 wound strike squad marines, it's going to be interesting and feeling like playing Grey Knights as if they were Primaris. Moving over to the Deathwatch, I think it looks very good for the veteran squad now, and honestly I expect these to outperform Deathwatch Intercessors again. With 2 wounds they're going to be similarly durable, and rather than every guy being locked into a bolt rifle, you can take all sorts of fun mix and matched gear, such as the slightly infamous Stormbolter and Storm Shield combo, and potentially mix in heavy weapons such as frag cannons and things. If their base profile does cost a bit less than Intercessors, then I think they're likely going to be the way to go for Deathwatch. Finally, for a quick overview of Chaos, I do quite like the way that the standard Chaos Marine is now going to be a lot more on par with Primaris, maybe the Bolter a bit shorter range and everything, but they're no longer going to feel quite so vastly different. It will likely come with a bit of a points increase, so it might help define roles a bit more for the standard Chaos Marine and also Chaos Cultists. Both could be decent in their own situations, much like Tactical Marines and Scouts. Probably the single biggest impact to the meta, I think, will be the flavours of Cult Marine going to 2 wounds. These guys are expensive and bring some powerful abilities to the table, so making them quite a lot harder to remove is going to allow the Chaos players to get so much more value out of them. Khorne Berserkers like Death Company already have melee damage output sorted. Not dying to a stiff breeze as much might actually allow them to make combat a bit more. Plague Marines can already get very durable out of the combos from Psychic Awakening. Having an extra wound on top of that, and also the disgustingly resilient Feel No Pain type save, is going to make them absolutely horrible to shift. Again, like Death Company, having access to that Shrug Off save really does make it a much bigger deal when you're not dealing with just 1 wound infantry. The same basically goes for Rubric Marines and Noise Marines. Rubric Marines are essentially just going to ignore small arms fire between all this dust and 2 wounds. And Noise Marines again are one of those incredibly hard-hitting units that you can fire twice with endless cacophony, and then your opponent is just going to frantically try and kill them as quickly as possible, so punishing them by making them very tough is going to be very nice. All the same thoughts go for Chaos Terminators as the Loyalist cousins. Again, with Death Guard Disgusting Resilience, I think the Blightlord Terminators are going to be a real stars here. Even without buffs, these guys are going to be an absolute pain to remove. You're just going to need masses and masses of high strength, high damage, anti-tank firepower. Again, from the core book, I think that units like Havocs and Warp Talons that deal decent amounts of damage but aren't very durable in return are going to see a lot of benefits. And I do wonder whether Havocs might lose their Toughness 5 bonus that they randomly got in the last Chaos Codex. I suspect they might be brought in line again with their standard Chaos counterparts. So plenty of units that could get very interesting depending on the points cost. I would bear in mind that we don't know the points costs yet, so I wouldn't get too worked up about any one of these units for the time being. As always, with looking to the future, we will have to see the rest of the rules to actually draw any proper conclusions as to what's going to be best. If there are any other units that you're particularly looking forward to, whether they're Sternguard Veterans, Assault Marines or something completely different, please let me know down in the comments, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see similar videos like this. If you've been watching regularly and you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page which you can find a link to down in the video description below. Making all of these videos does take quite a lot of time, so any support is greatly appreciated if you would like to keep them coming. Channel patrons get to see one video early a week at least. There's regular votes to see what sort of videos come next on the channel, and you're also automatically entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway, which happens once a month, with the chance to win some multiple big kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.